Well, we are in part 2 of our series, Voice of a Shepherd, and we started this last week, right at the beginning of the year, because this is often a question that you get when you're a pastor, when you're in ministry. You just hear this a lot. How do I hear from God? How do I hear His voice? How do I know what His will for my life is? How do I know what He wants me to do? I mean, those are some of the questions that you get, and so that's what we're trying to answer, or at least walk through and give some handles to be able to move forward with this idea of actually hearing from God, because God really does. This is what we said last week, that we really can hear from God. Some of you just weren't even sure of that. It's like, I just want to know, like, can I? And to answer your question, yes, He does speak to us, but it's figuring out how He speaks to us. He really does want to speak to you. He does want to reveal His will for you. He does want you to know what He wants you to do. As a matter of fact, He wants you to know His will more than you want to know it. Did you know that? He really does. He wants to speak to you. He wants to, and not just like on a macro level, like, I just want to give you the purpose for your life. He really wants to speak to you on a micro level, like the day-to-day activities, the everyday decisions, the things that you do, who you're with, where you'll go. He wants to be a part of all those things, every facet of your lives. And He wants to be clear. Some of us think, well, I know God speaks, but I think He just tries to be really mysterious. Well, He doesn't. He is mysterious because we can't fully understand Him, but not in the way He communicates. He really does want us to know. He wants to be clear. He wants us to understand. He's not trying to hide anything. He's not trying to keep any secrets from you. He doesn't want you to be frustrated or be uncertain or be anxious. He wants to reveal Himself to you and for you to know. But there's a couple of things that need to happen first. This was kind of foundational. What we said last week is, first, you really just have to want to. You have to actually want to hear from God. And I mean like a desperation kind of want. And then you have to be willing to say yes before He speaks. And that's usually our hang-up, isn't it? I mean, we're not real certain that we want to do exactly what He says until we know what He says, And yet, these things have to happen if we're going to begin the process of learning to recognize the voice of our shepherd. Jesus Himself said, I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. They know the sound of my voice. They follow me because they trust me, because they know the sound of my voice. We really can know the sound of our shepherd's voice, and He wants to speak to us. So today, here's what I want to do. I just want to assume, let's pretend for today that we've got these boxes checked, okay? Because some of us, we come out of last week and we're thinking, okay, so I already do those things. I really do. Like, I want to know, and I think that's true of most Christians, most people who follow Jesus. They do want to know. I want to know what He wants me to do. I want to know His will for my life. And yeah, I think I'm pretty certain I'm willing to be obedient to what He wants me to do. I'm willing to do that. So let's just assume those things are true. But oftentimes that may be true in our lives, but we still don't know what to do. We still can't quite figure out how to hear from Him. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. Maybe He's really not speaking. And those are our concerns. And so that's where we're going to go today, is to try to answer some of that. What can we do next? And I think there's some very practical things that begin to happen. Let me illustrate it this way. Back in 1962, a man named Jim Buckwalter, I'm certain you've never heard of him, his wife was a bit of an insomniac, and she complained all the time that she couldn't get a lot of sleep at home, but she slept very well in a hotel. I mean, it's usually opposite for most of us, but back in the day, that was her thing. And it was because, she said, the droning of that air conditioner just helped her to sleep. It just kind of wiped out all the other noises, and so she was able to sleep. And so he got busy. He was like, okay, so I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to create something that mimics the noise of that air conditioner. And he used a dog bowl, and he punched a couple of holes in it, and he took a small motor with a fan and wrapped it in a filter, and he put the dog bowl on top, and he turned it on, and it created this kind of soothing, whirring sound. And he called it a sound conditioner. Not an air conditioner. He called it a sound conditioner. And then it worked so well, his wife loved it so much, as did all of their friends. They all wanted one. Hey, dog bowl fan, can you do that for me? They all wanted some of that. And so they started a little company. And they began to mass produce these, and they've sold 4.5 million of these little things since then. Now they're a little more sophisticated, but 5 of the 4.5 million are actually in my home now. And this is one of them. I don't know, you may be familiar with this. Back in the day, years and years ago, they called it a sleep mate. I don't know, for some reason they got rid of that name, but they used to call it a sleep mate, and you could only get it in JCPenney, and it was like $49.95, always. It was $50. Had 2 speeds, up and down would be, low and then high, and so it just created this word. It essentially created white noise. That's why I've just always called it a noisemaker. That's not real pleasing sounding. I mean, sound conditioner sounds a little bit better, but I just called it a noisemaker because it creates noise. Because it just creates this soothing sound so that you really can't hear what's going. That's what white noise is. You can't really distinguish what's going on around you. You might pick up, some of it might be perceptible, but you're not certain of everything. And so it kind of silences, so to speak, some of the noise that's going on around you. And you're able to focus. And so all of my kids grew up with these things. All of our bedrooms have them. My office has one. I mean, this is, matter of fact, I did it. Don't anybody steal this. They're still $49.95, by the way, with the little 2 speeds. But you can get the cheaper ones, 1 speed, for like $29. I'm not a salesman, I promise, but I love these things. I mean, I would sell them if I had to, because this was life changing, and I use it when I'm studying, when I'm in my office. Matter of fact, I'm not real fond of it just being like super quiet where I can hear a clock tick. This really helps. It just kind of helps condition the sound around me. But here's the thing: when it comes to our spiritual lives, I don't know, it's a very positive thing as far as helping you sleep, but when it comes to our spiritual lives, I think white noise can be extremely distracting. Matter of fact, it can be the very thing that keeps us from being able to hear God's voice. Because like when you're in a room with this on, you know something's kind of going on out there, but you can't really hear it. You can't really distinguish it. You're not certain. It's just very muffled. And so that's essentially what begins to happen. The busyness and the noise within our lives, and I know you can kind of see where that's going. The white noise of our busy lives really creates a distracting sound from anything else. It turns our head. It causes us to walk in a different direction because we can't really hear what's going on around us. We can't hear God's voice. And He may actually be speaking to us. So you may really want to hear His voice. You may have even said, hey, yes to whatever it is you want me to do, but there's still a lot of noise around. There's this white noise that seems pervasive, and you can't seem to get away from it. And so today I want to talk about figuring out how to reduce some of that. Maybe first just recognizing what that noise really looks like, and then understanding how important that is when it comes to relating to God. And so in order to do this, we're going to be in 1 Kings chapter 19. And if you don't know where that is, this is Old Testament stuff. And so the best way I know how, like if you have a paper Bible, you don't hear a lot of pages rustle anymore in churches because of our devices. But just in case you've got one of these, you start at the beginning and you just go right. And it's the 11th book. So that's the easiest way to get there. 1 Kings chapter 19, it helps to have a little bit of context, as with anything. It doesn't, for me, I don't like just jumping in and reading a story. I like to know kind of where the story came before. And so I want to give a little bit of the backstory so that we can understand this a little bit. 922 BC, Israel became a divided kingdom. Solomon was the 3rd king of Israel. He had been on the throne. Everything was wonderful. I mean, this was the golden age. They were powerful. They had clout. They had influence in world affairs. Israel was great. Solomon dies. His son tries to take over the throne, but he's replaced in a portion of Israel, and so they split. And so they were divided at that point. There was a northern kingdom called Israel. There was a southern kingdom called Judah. They were in conflict with one another. They fought a little bit, and then there was peace, and then they fought, and then there was peace. And for the next 200 years, God would speak to His people through prophets. These were the people God was using to communicate. And prophets were just people who God had given a unique and special ability to be able to hear His voice so that they could communicate His direction for Israel. This wasn't like now, and we talk about how, God's Spirit lives within us and that we can hear from Him, and there's a very individual, personal relationship with Him. At the time, God only communicated through specific people in order to speak his message to everybody else. And these prophets were those people. Elijah was one of them. You may be familiar with this guy. He's one of kind of our major prophets. We know who this guy is because of his activity, because of what God did through this man. And Elijah showed up. You may be familiar with this story, but Elijah showed up during the reign of King Ahab and Queen Jezebel. Now, you may have thought that this Jezebel was really just like a slur. You just thought it was in like UrbanDictionary.com. You didn't know that was like a real person. But this is where Jezebel got its really negative connotation because she was evil. Ahab was too. He did evil in the sight of the Lord, is the way Scripture talks about him. And he married a foreigner named Jezebel. And she came in and she brought everything with her. She brought all her stuff. She brought paganism, and she brought the worship of the fertility god named Baal. And so she convinced Ahab that this is what they need to do. And she wanted just to replace the worship of Yahweh, the Hebrew word for God or Lord, to replace that with Baal worship. That's what she wanted. And so, but what began to happen was what we call syncretism. And that's one of those like $100 words, right? But now you've learned something. Syncretism is when it's a pseudo version of a religion. It's a false version of a religion. It looks really good from the outside. It looks kind of like everything else. But really, when you dig in and you understand, it's actually very different. And so what began to happen is Israel continued to worship Yahweh on the one hand because, hey, that's our warrior God. And he goes to battle for us and he fights for us. And over the centuries, he has protected us and he has shown himself to be faithful in that. But now we've got this Baal on the other hand, and we're going to worship Baal as well, this pagan god, because he's the fertility god. And we've been in this drought for a long time, and so we could really use some help. And we're going to pray, and he's going to send us some rain, and he's going to take care of our land, and he's going to make it fertile once again. And so that's what began to happen. And unfortunately, Jezebel didn't like the arrangement. She wasn't real excited about, coexisting, this dual worship thing. And so she began to take it upon herself to eliminate the worship of Israel's God, Yahweh. She wanted to do away with that. So she imported literally hundreds of Baal prophets of Baal. Since Baal isn't a real god, it's interesting. It's like, what exactly were y'all prophesying about? Like, did y'all get together and make stuff up? How did this work exactly? But she brings them in, and their duty was to go all over Israel, setting up places of worship and different places to come and to worship this Baal in order to eliminate and to drive out the worship of this God of Israel. Well, in the meantime, she was like, I'll bring all these guys in, but I've got to eliminate the prophets of God. And so she began to order that they be persecuted, that they be hunted down and killed, slaughtered. And so, of course, you can imagine they dispersed. They began to run for their lives. A lot of them went into hiding. A lot of them were killed. But what essentially, since they were God's mouthpiece, essentially God's voice was being made quiet because they were disappearing. They were being killed and they were running for the hills. And so God's voice was being eliminated. But what's amazing is God's voice was still being spoken through this man, Elijah. For whatever reason, because God always does strange things like this, instead of like preserving and protecting like a large group of these guys, his hand is specifically on Elijah. And he begins to speak just to Elijah. And if you watch it's kind of interesting to see how it's the same pattern, how God speaks to Elijah in the couple of chapters before 19. And he speaks to Elijah, and then Elijah gets the word, and so he goes and he does, and he's obedient, and he goes exactly where God has told him to go, and then he waits. And then he hears a word from the Lord, and so then he'll go wherever it is God wanted him to go, and he'll do whatever it is God wanted him to do, and then he'll wait. He didn't get the complete picture. He didn't get here is the ultimate plan. It was just, hey, one step at a time. One step at a time. And that was the pattern. It was hear from God, do what God said, wait. Hear from God, do what God said, wait. And that was the pattern that they had. And that's what Elijah did. And eventually that led Elijah to a place called Mount Carmel. It's in the northwestern part of Israel, right real near the Mediterranean Sea. You can still find it today. And that's where it brought him. And at that moment in history, Elijah challenged all of the prophets of Baal, 450 prophets of Baal. He brought them there and he said, I'm going to test my God against yours. And we're going to decide today. We've been doing this whole dual worship thing. Well, don't you want to know like which one's actually there listening? And in an incredible display of God's power, he defeats, and you'll have to read the story, we don't have time for it today, he defeats the prophets of Baal and proves once and for all that God is the God of the universe, that he is the one true God, that the God of Israel is the one true God. And then Elijah orders for all of the prophets of Baal to be captured and killed. Gruesome. Well, of course, Jezebel doesn't like that. I mean, as you can imagine, she wanted to bring in her stuff and get, kind of her plan going. And this was going against the grain a little bit. She wasn't real happy. And a matter of fact, she got word back to Elijah telling him, I'm not going to sleep till I kill you. I'm coming after you. And of course, she had been successful before. And so Elijah was scared to death. He took off. He ran for the hills. He did what everybody else had done. Even though God's hand had been on him, even though God had been speaking to him and had proven himself faithful, in this moment, right after God had rained down fire and shown his incredible power and might, he gets scared for his own life and he takes off. And this is where we pick up the story. Chapter 19, verse 8, right in the middle of verse 8. Elijah traveled, get this, for 40 days and 40 nights. It's a long way. Until he reached Horeb, Mount Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and he spent the night. If kind of that northwestern part of Israel, if you can see it on a map, if you can visualize, that very eastern side of the Mediterranean Sea, he traveled from there. He went to Jezreel. That was his first stop. And then he finds out that he's going to be pursued and be put to death. And so he takes off and literally makes a beeline, almost due south. Heads all the way out of Israel into the wilderness, into the desert, and back to where God had met with Moses and given him his commands. Mount Horeb, Mount Sinai, you may have heard it called. The same place. This is where God had met with Moses, and for some reason, that's where Elijah decided to go. And he takes off and he heads there and he's scared. And listen to what happens. And the word of the Lord came. He would spend the night in the cave. And I don't know, maybe it was early in the morning. I just imagine it probably woke him up that night because a word of the Lord came to him. And in the original language, came is not actually in there. There's not actually a word for it. It's just it's implied in the other verbs. And so a word of the Lord unto him. The word of the Lord unto him is really how it can be literally translated. It's just saying, it wasn't necessarily audible. I mean, Elijah had been hearing God's voice, for a while, but this just kind of maybe broke through the white noise is the way I kind of imagine. He's scared, he's fearful, he's trying to get some rest, he's been running, he's exhausted, he's tired, he's hungry. I mean, this has been 40 days and 40 nights now, and yet God pierces through all of that white noise, and he speaks to him. And he says, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? Haven't I told you before, you can trust me? I mean, this is we've been doing this for a while now. We kind of got this thing going, I talk, you go and you do, and then you wait again. What are you doing here? Why have you left? I didn't call you to this place. You've stopped listening. And I think it was in that moment that the white noise in his life looked like fear, don't you think? I mean, it can be fear in our lives. It can be bitterness sometimes. It can be pride and envy. There's white noise takes all kinds of shapes in our lives, but it's anything that actually distracts us and blocks out from being able to hear from God. And that's exactly what had happened to Elijah. And he knew it and he allowed it to happen. Well, in our lives, this is sometimes the case. And it's not always just, fear and pride and envy. There's a much more physical, practical side to this too. Isn't it true that sometimes white noise just comes in the form of our possessions and pleasure and our pursuit of these? Here's the thing, though. Nobody's preaching against this stuff. I mean, this is, God created this. He created us to own and to have things and to possess things, and He created us to enjoy it. He put that into His creation. He created the world, and then He gave it to man to rule over. And so we possess things all the time. The problem is when those possessions begin to possess us. We've talked about that before. And our minds get so consumed with more and more that we begin to block out what's going on around us. It becomes just noise. It's just that because that's all we can think about. I've graduated and I've gotten into my job and my career and I'm, I'll have time for that later. But right now, it's like going and I gotta keep up with people. And man, I'm almost 30 years old. I've got to own my own house now, and it's got to be fairly large because look at theirs. Like that, and we get outside of our means. We get upside down in debt, and we don't really know what to do, and it begins to consume us, doesn't it? And sometimes it's just the pleasure of life. It's nothing wrong with enjoyment, absolutely. But when the pursuit of pleasure becomes your top priority, you stop being able to hear God's voice. It's just the way it goes because that consumes your thoughts. It's like white noise. It's all I can think about. It's all I can think about. I just want to go and do and please myself. It becomes our top priority. Well, instead of speaking to Elijah and responding to him, he just says, hey, look, what are you doing here? And listen to the response that Elijah gives. I think this is our position sometimes. I have been very zealous. Hold on just a minute, God. Don't forget, I've been very zealous. I've been very passionate for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. Have you forgotten, like my situation, my plight? They've rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars, and they put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. I'm in a really bad situation here. Have you not really seen what's going on? The reason that I've kind of been running is because, well, I needed to. I couldn't wait on you. Like this was about to happen. You gave me 2 feet. I thought I just needed to use them. It just seemed very practical. Hold on just a minute. I've been zealous for you. I've been pursuing you. It's everybody else who hasn't. Like they've rejected you. They've rejected your covenant. And they've even killed all of your prophets. You have no voice anymore. And I'm the only one left. And good gracious, if you weren't going to do it, well, I had to protect myself. I'm it. What would happen if I wasn't here? And then as if to just almost ignore that response, it's like I can see, it's like God just can see what's going on in Elijah. And instead of speaking directly to that, he just gives him a command. He says this, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. I'm not going to respond to that right now. I just want you to do something, Elijah. I want you to go out. And I want you to get close to me. I want you to stand in my presence. And maybe, he was just about to move. He was just about to head in that direction. And the Lord begins to show up. And you may be familiar with this passage, but listen with fresh ears again. Then a great and powerful wind tore through the mountains. Tore the mountains apart. Can you just imagine maybe how scary maybe that scene was? It actually shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not there. He was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake. I'm getting a little nervous at this point. You know what I'm saying? But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. Instead, after the fire came a gentle whisper. A gentle whisper. Don't miss this. Because this is that underlying principle that's kind of beneath the surface that you kind of have to look for, that you miss if you just kind of read through the pages or you're like, oh, I'm familiar with that. I've kind of heard that before. The way that the King James translated this was a still small voice. And the way we can translate it, because this is like a literal translation, lots of terminology, a soothing stillness is another way to look at that. A soothing, I mean, can you kind of get that? It's the stillness, the whisper part is also translated and used to talk about like a calm sea. When it's so calm, there's no wind and there's no waves, and it's just calm. There's peace, there's quiet, there's silence. Isn't that interesting? Because it says that's what he actually heard. This kind of gentle whisper, this soothing sound. Have you ever been so quiet, like, because it doesn't happen often, you know, we have trouble getting in these places, but have you ever found yourself in a place where it is deafeningly quiet? Anybody? It's almost a little irritating, isn't it? Because it seems overwhelming. You almost hear the silence because we're so not used to it. It's like when you sleep in a room with one of these, and then in the morning you cut it off, you notice it. While you were sleeping, you didn't notice it. It just distracted from everything around it. But as soon as you cut it off, it's, oh, I didn't realize that was going all this time. I'd forgotten that was there. And all of a sudden there's quiet. And that's this moment for him. Because maybe everything else, the turmoil, the craziness, the earthquake, the wind, I mean, he felt all that. He saw it. He experienced it. He could smell the fire burning. It was kind of the chaos of our lives. It's the stuff that goes on around us, and not just the big stuff, even just the little mundane, you know, the everyday stuff. And it so distracts us from being able to hear from him. And yet he's making a point here, and he just says, no, look, you know where I am? In this gentle, calm, quiet whisper. That's where I am. That's how I want to speak to you. And when Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face. Just get a mental image here. And he went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. He heard this whisper, and so you can imagine he just covers himself and he walks toward the mouth of the cave. And then, notice the difference here. Same question, different presentation. A voice said to him. It wasn't that the word came to him, or that it was just kind of, you know, maybe a thought in him. This was a voice actually said to him, but he only heard it once it got quiet. And when he got close, what are you doing here, Elijah? And maybe now his heart was in tune. Maybe now he could really hear the question. Maybe now he really knew what God was saying to him. And isn't this true? I mean, this takes us all the way back to the beginning now of what we were talking about. It's that white noise. I mean, isn't it true that there are just some things in our lives that distract us? I mean, I really want to know what God wants me to do. I want to know his voice. I'm willing to do, I really think I'm willing to do whatever he wants, check box, but I'm still not hearing from him. Do you think maybe it's because we have gotten so good at not hearing all the noise that's going on around us? And we don't even realize how distracting it is. We've gotten numb to it. It's like white noise has almost whitewashed our mind. We don't even realize it's there. We don't even realize how noisy our lives are. Because we fill every waking moment. I mean, I was guilty. Oftentimes I'll, read through my Bible plan at night, when I'm kind of, that's just kind of my part of my routine. And so like right before I go to bed, that's my last thought. I'm looking at that and I'm focused on that. But I was thinking, good grief, like I'm literally filling, every breath of my day, every waking moment with my phone, regardless of what's on it. Like it's just, we don't even realize, we don't even recognize how noisy it is. And we don't realize that God, while he can speak very loud, he's got an outside voice. The majority of the time he speaks to us with a gentle whisper. Just kind of a nudge. Just a prompting. He's just kind of wooing us. And it's that thing we can't really explain, Especially if you have followed Jesus for any length of time, you may be familiar with this kind of gentle whisper kind of thing, and it's not audible. I don't know. It's just kind of a nudge. It's like an inner thought, And I know that God has led me to do this, and we tell people, and it's like, I know that he spoke to me and he told me that this is what I need to do. And your friend goes, oh, really? Well, like, how did you know that? What did he sound like? And you're thinking, well, I don't know. I just know. It's what happened for me years ago, my senior year of college at Auburn. And I remember the very night that I felt my call to ministry. I mean, it's a vivid moment for me. Nobody turned a record on and had God's voice playing. Like I don't remember any of that. And I can't even explain it really. But I knew with certainty. Like I've never looked back and thought that maybe, well, I missed it. I knew at that moment that I had heard God's voice. I can't explain it. But in that moment, I was quiet enough to be able to hear it. And he does kind of pierce through that darkness sometimes, doesn't he? He gets through. You know, occasionally when we are quiet, and it's usually when something's gone wrong, and so, we're desperate and we're crying out, and he'll speak, and it's gentle, and it's quiet, and it's a nudge, and it's a prompting. And you didn't even know it. You didn't even recognize it maybe. But then life gets really noisy again. You turn it back on, and life goes on. And yet he's still saying, hey, I want to talk to you. I want to share with you. I want to lead you. I want to guide you. I want to direct your life. I want to be a part of those decisions. Invite me in. Quiet yourself. Listen. Get closer. We need to learn how to reduce the noise in our lives. It's like, that sounds good. But there really are some very practical things, and they'll seem obvious and simple, but horribly difficult in our culture today. I mean, this is true. I mean, first you just got to learn how to get quiet. I mean, that is where it begins. You got to get quiet. It's like, I knew that. If you're been a Christian or been a church person, for a while, my mind, I know if I was sitting there, what I would see, I would just see, you're talking about quiet times. I'm supposed to have a quiet time. And if you're unchurched or you hadn't been around or you don't know this whole Jesus thing, you don't care about that terminology. It's like a quiet time. What is that? And yet, in spiritual world, it's a quiet time. Those are my morning devotions. We have all this language and, that's my time with God and that's my special moment. And it's like, all sounds weird, and yet that's not really what I'm talking about. While I do mean absolutely it's important that, that we spend some time in prayer and talking with our God and listening in those moments and reading His Word. That's not all that I'm talking about, because for us, that kind of loses some of its luster, doesn't it? It's like, all we think is like, 10 minutes a day keeps the devil away. That's it's like an apple a day kind of thing. It's like, let me just take my medicine, check some boxes. Anybody find that very satisfying on phones? Like, just check the box. Anybody? I'm the only one. You love to pick up your phone and you just want to, I read it, check. Oh, I read it. You can see it. It tells me it gives me a big check mark when I finish that for the day. Like it's almost kind of that routine. And in those moments, we get quiet, and I think God does speak. But if the rest of our lives is full of white noise, if the other 23 hours and 50 minutes of our day is noisy, you're not going to really hear the gentle whisper of your Savior. And so I have some thoughts, and this is just ways to get quiet, because I think oftentimes you hear stuff like that, and we're not real good at actually applying it. It sounds really good, and it's like very tweetable. Oh yeah, we need to get quiet. I need to hear the voice of our shepherd, and all those phrases. But actually applying it and figuring out. So here, these are just my thoughts. Don't get up and leave. But I had some ideas, okay? Because I think initially we need to learn how to create boundaries when it comes to getting quiet. Because I think that's really the issue. We just don't have any boundaries when it comes to every arena of our lives, and so everything kind of controls us. And we're just kind of led, on a whim. It's like, whatever's next. Well, I got to do this. Well, I got to go there. Well, I got to pay this. Well, I got to, meet them. And everything just kind of leads us along, and we have no boundaries around anything. And that's when life gets noisy. And so this is just a very practical way, a step to take that might help reduce some of this. At least switch it from like high to low. And here's some thoughts. Maybe when it comes to your job, the arena of your professional life, here's a thought. Here's a boundary. So don't take offense to this. This is just a thought, okay? My thought. How about commit to only working a set number of hours a week that you and your spouse agree to? That's a boundary. It could be any number of things, but I think it's important that you and your spouse agree to that, because you pursuing that job and going after that career, moving up the chain, moving up the rung, it's like you just kind of want to work as much as you want, but your wife or your husband may not really agree with that. They're not real sure about that, and so it needs to be agreed on. We would just stop it. Well, okay, commit to only working a set number of hours a week. Let's see, 100. Okay, that you and your spouse agree to. It's important. It's a boundary. That might help eliminate. It might free up some space. It might, and I don't know, if your job won't allow it, consider changing jobs. I promise, I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just saying, are we serious or not about hearing God's voice? Because if we don't get quiet in different areas of our lives, we're not going to hear it. And we're going to walk away and we're going to separate ourselves. And we're going to allow fear and all the trials of life to distract us. How about your hobbies? And these are, again, let me just read through this. This is just some thoughts. Don't try to do everything you want to do. Just pick one or two. And the older you get, the more limiting this probably has to be if you have a job and you have a family. And it probably needs to be proportionate to the size of your family. Again, practical. Don't not think about these things because it's hard. Maybe these are the very things that would help turn some of that noise down and dial it down a bit so that you can hear from God. Just limit some of that stuff. Maybe it's your money and your stuff, okay? So in this context, here would be my thought. I'm not saying go sell everything and become a missionary, okay? So that's not, I was like, we're in church. That's what he's going to say. I'm just saying live within your means. Don't spend more than you make. That's a really good boundary. Because when you live above your means and you get in debt, what begins to happen? It begins to consume you. That's all you begin to think about. Well, I got to work more so that I can make more, so that I can pay on this, so that I can do the things that I want. And then I got to work more so that I can earn more, so that I can pay on this, so that I can do that. It's a vicious cycle, and it gets noisy, and we don't even realize it because that's what everybody does. How silly. How silly to think that God would lead us to actually limiting ourselves to what we make. And then, this is just another thought when it comes to finances, limit working on your finances to once a week, because it can be so overwhelming, right? Because now we've got everything online and it's on our apps, and literally every waking second, if we're in the bathroom or at the doctor's office, we can pull it up and see what our account balance is. Oh, I wonder if that check went through. Oh, well, let me check. And it's just almost like, we're not even paying attention. So maybe consider limiting that. Quit paying bills, limit it to, once or twice a week. Whatever's practical, whatever works, but don't just let it control you. Your phone, maybe consider deleting some apps. I know it's like, I use it for work and I use it for, that's great, but maybe there's more that you could do, with that time. Because it's really just the applications that eat up the extra time. That's really, kind of the issue. It's like we've got extra time, but we fill it, because we got things we can do. I got a game I can play, and it's not wrong. It's not sinful. It's noisy. And then social media, consider checking it, once or twice a day. And I know that's like cardinal sin for some of you. It's like, are you serious? Like, I might miss somebody's birthday. Are you kidding me? I got to be first on the list or they're not going to think I'm their friend. Like, I got to be at least in the top 10 of happy birthdays in their feed. So I got to check. Got to. I have 1,015 friends. Like, I've got to. Limit it. You know what? if they're your friends, they'll still be your friends. Like, it's okay. They'll respect that you created some of those boundaries for this very reason. Maybe even consider just fasting from social media altogether every now and then. Just imagine how not noisy life might be without it. Again, it's not sin. It's not in the Bible. It's not like it's so wrong. It's just consuming. It's this. It's not like you're rebelling against God. It's just you can't hear him. You got to get quiet, and then you got to get close. As soon as Elijah heard that gentle whisper, it's like, okay, God wasn't all in the big stuff. He was in that quiet whisper, and as soon as he did, he got quiet, and he covered his face, and he walked into God's presence at the mouth of the cave. And he got close. Here's why, because proximity matters. Proximity matters when it comes to hearing somebody. If you think about a gentle whisper, you're in church, and so you got to whisper to one another, right? This would be a prime example. What do? Hey. And what do? They lean in. They go, what? And then if you can't hear them real well, you kind of squint, and you're like, what? Because it's like helps you concentrate. What'd you say? That's what you do. You lean in. And it's like, God knows what he's doing. It's like sneaky. I'm going to speak to you, but I'm going to make you get close to me so that you can hear me. I want you to lean in. Because the farther you get, if you're a sheep and you're lost, the farther you get from your shepherd, the more likely you are to miss his voice. You can't hear him if you've taken off. And that's all he's saying. I just want you to get close to me. So I'm going to remain subtle. I'm going to speak quietly. And you may not always hear it because you're not really listening. You got too much going on. There's too much white noise. But I just want you to lean in. I'm not going to get any louder. I'm going to wait. Lean in. You want to hear my whisper? Get quiet. Get close. I want you to hear Rhett and Linda's story. Pastor Leroy mentioned them when he was up here. I want you to hear how they have grappled with this very thing. They're church planners now. They're going to be planning a church in Boise, Idaho.
Hi, my name is Rhett. This is my beautiful wife, Linda. And I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama, and my wife is from Texas, and we've been married going on 12 years.
That's right.
Been in ministry for over 25 years. The majority of my life I've been in ministry specifically for worship and music. It wasn't until about 2 years ago that I came to my wife and I said, I know this sounds crazy, but I really feel like God has been preparing us to plant a life-giving church, and I don't really know what to do with it.
Well, when he said that he thought God was calling us to plant a church, I said, there's no way. You're crazy. I don't feel that at all. And it took a year of just thinking about it, talking about it, me praying about it before I really started to see that vision that he had already shared with me. I really felt like God was saying, yes, this was where we were headed.
So once I had shared that dream initially with Linda, it was at that point that I realized, such a huge decision, we had to be in agreement over. So I basically just said, okay, Lord, if this is you, I'm going to surrender this to you. And I know that eventually, if this is you, you will confirm this in my wife, and we'll be in agreement together. We began to open it up with friends who were really close to us. Pastor Tripp being one of those good friends, I actually called him and shared it with him, and I knew it'd be a safe place to where he would give me godly wisdom.
Once we decided that planting a church was the dream that we had, we were in agreement and we had gotten godly counsel. We started with a short list of cities that we felt like we were drawn to or we could live in. And then we just started asking God to give us a heart for the people, because he really is a relational God. Rhett and I flew to Boise, Idaho, spent a few days there meeting people, driving around. And we left with a great feeling, but not a strong answer. Then we came home and asked God to show us where we were supposed to be. We put our phones away. We stopped asking for people's opinions as much. We really just tried to quiet the world around us because it's loud. By quietening the deafening noise of the world, we were able to focus on that still, small whisper. And by the end of that week, he had proven himself faithful and shown us that we were supposed to be going to Boise, Idaho.
So what's crazy about this whole thing is that tomorrow, actually, we're loading the truck with family and friends. and we're headed to a place that really we've never really met before. So yeah, there's a lot of unknowns that are honestly, just being very real, that scare us to death, but it could be the craziest thing we've ever done in our life or the smartest thing in our life. We really don't know what's next. We think we have a plan, we think we know what's going to happen, but it's really in His hands. And although we can't necessarily see the big picture, we see it in our heart, but we don't see it in the natural. And a part of our trust is just taking that step and knowing that He's going to be there for the next step and the next step. And so, here we go.
Here we go. They heard, and they've decided to do what He's told them to do. They don't have the whole picture. They're not sure exactly what that's going to look like, but they're going to wait and listen again. If you want to hear a whisper, you have to get quiet and you have to get close. You have to be able to eliminate some of the noise of this world if you want to hear the voice of your shepherd. Can I pray for you? Heavenly Father, thank You for being willing to speak to us. God, thank You for preserving Your words. For 3,000 years, we have stories in our hands that still speak to our lives. They still speak to us. They're still relevant. And I thank You so much that there's a way to apply these things to our lives. God, I pray for every person in this room that You would give them that unique ability to hear from You, and then give them the courage to know exactly what You would have them do with it. Lord, I pray that You would move us to action, that You would also cause us to be still, to be quiet, and to stand in Your presence so that we can hear from You. Give us the discipline to know how to do that. And we want to glorify You in this. And we pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.